All right, so in lab 3, what we're going to do is, I guess lab 3 is kind of a little different because a lot of it's actually, um, a lot of the reading is about the design. And we talked a lot about that last week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it this week, especially in regards to the common lookup table. It's one that I really kind of want to talk about because you guys have done a little, you built the common lookup table. And in this lab, we are preceding some data is kind of the term. And what we mean by preceding is that in our database, there's a kind of utility data that we need, data that has to be there before we can actually put in the meat of the data, if you will. So a good example being system user. We all saw the system user table, and it's going to hold like usernames and stuff like that, basically accounts. And in that table, we have a user type, I believe, or a group ID, something like that. And that comes from the common lookup table. And basically, before we really put a user in, we have to have like stuff like that, like the user group, and that sort of thing. Or for like telephone, we have to have is it a home or work telephone number, or address, is it home or work. So basically what we're going to do in this pre-seeder in lab 3, we are going to seed some of that data, and it's called pre-seeding. Basically, we're going to put all the utilitarian data in our database, because that way in lab 4, we're actually going to put in stuff. Like we actually put in like Harry Potter, and actually I think Harry Potter comes later, but we put in actual like people's names into our database. But before we do that, we have to get some of this utilitarian stuff. So for this week, I'm actually going to follow the lab instructions because there's not anything too crazy that we need to do with our previous example. I know we were kind of, what were we building? Person, we were building a to-do list type thing. And we don't have too much utilitarian stuff in there. So we're going to kind of not do that right now. We're going to come back to that for lab 4 is when we'll work on our own little project. So for this week, I'm actually going to go through the lab and talk a little bit about it because that's probably the best way. So anyways, lab 3, we're preceding data. So step 1, we are going to disable some constraints. And this is a big deal because as of right now, if we tried to do an insert into system user, we would get an error. So let's see, where do I want to do this? I'm always so scared to delete stuff. Let's discard it. Let's just open it up here. We'll just work out of here for right now. Okay. So if I wanted to insert into system user lab, I guess lab is the keyword. If I wanted to insert into system user lab, the problem is that there's a constraint on that table. And right now I'm going to just show you a system user table. But if I control enter, there we go. So if we look at the constraints on here, what am I looking for? There we go. So if I look at the constraints on this table, we have a couple that are really important. So the first one's our primary key, which isn't a huge deal. But the other one is our created by and last updated by. And these ones are really important. And then we also have our system user group and our system user type. So those are all kind of the ones that we talked about. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to disable some constraints. We're going to disable 3 and 4. The reason being is because if we don't have data somewhere to pull off of, it'll actually say, hey, you can't insert into there because it doesn't exist. So for example, we can test this. If I look at common lookup, let's just select everything from common lookup. if I don't have any data in here and then I try to do an insert into system user, and like we talked about before, we have our values that we can use. We can also specify the columns. I think we talked a lot about inserts last time. We'll talk a little bit more this time. But we're going to use the sequence, so system user s1.nextVal. And then we have, let me pull this up so we can actually see our rows here. System user name, let's put sysadmin. System user group ID. Now this is where we don't know what the group ID is, so we're going to put null there. And then we have system user type. Again, we don't know what that is. Well, we don't have anywhere to pull it from. Then we have a first name. We'll put system. Middle name, we're going to put null. Last name, we're going to put admin. And then our created by, creation date, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to, again, we don't have any of that data, so we're going to put that. I'm going to say it was created today. Sysdate. So now if I try to run this, you'll notice that it says, yo, you can't insert null into system user group ID. And so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to disable those constraints. So that way we can do an initial insert. Because the problem is right now we can't insert anything. Because if we look at common lookup, it has created by and last updated by, and those have to be pointed to system user. So we're caught in this big conundrum where we built our database so tight and so constrained, which is really good, right? We built it as if it was end game. So we built it so tight and constrained that we actually can't even do an insert into the table to even get started. So we are going to disable those constraints so we can do one insert. And once we have that one insert, then we can do a lot more. So if you look at the week 3 instructions, we are going to disable these constraints. And disabling constraints is actually really easy. There's a UI way to do it, but we're going to do it in our code, so that way obviously it works over and over and over again. But it's as simple as, so let's try it right here. We're going to say alter table, common lookup. And we're going to say disable constraint. And this is why we give those constraints names. So we're going to disable FK system. Oh, and we're not. Let me put the right table here. Working with system user. Sorry. Disable constraint FK system user. And we are going to do 3. So let's run this, make sure we get it. And you'll notice that it says it's altered. And we're going to copy this, and we can do the same thing for 4. All right, so now let's try to do this. And now you'll notice, oh, we did the wrong one somewhere. Let's look. 3 and 4, I got the right ones right. And I'm working on the base tables, which might be a big problem. Why? So let's try to disable, well, let's look at those constraints again. So our constraints, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. No, that should have worked. I did get that one disabled, right? Let's make sure she doesn't need a good old-fashioned commit. Okay, usually that's easier. Oh, and that's let's see, we disabled the foreign key. And then we need, here's another tricky spot. So this isn't complaining about the foreign key constraint. This is actually complaining about the not null constraint. So the other thing we need to do, and if I was following the instructions, I'd know, we need to remove the not null constraints. So then we can also alter table, system user, disable constraint, NN, system user, and again, I don't remember which one it was, so let's take a look. And these are check constraints, basically to check to make sure it's not null. So we need to disable 2 and system user type, so 2 and 3. You can also just take those off. Like you can actually alter the column if you want. Now that I talked, I can't remember what those were again. It was 2 and 3. Yep, 2 and 3. Basically, by disabling the constraint, we're allowing us to break our own rules. And now let's try to do this. And now you'll notice that we get the one that I was looking for the first time, which is saying you can't insert null into created by and all that kind of stuff. So what we need to do is we will also, and I think on your tables, this is actually already disabled. If not, just disable it like I'm going to do right now. But I believe on, because I'm kind of working on the base tables here. So let's go ahead and also alter those ones. Sorry, I'm going to get rid of this window here. So we got rid of those ones, and then we can also alter the table, system user. And obviously you'll be doing this with your system user lab. We're going to disable the constraint. And you can see the ones that are disabled here, which is kind of nice. Last updated by is enabled, so we're going to take that off. Created by, we're going to take that off. We're going to do this way since you already know how to do it. Created by, take you off. Actually, creation date we want. Last updated by we want off. There we go. All right, now let's try our insert here. Oh, and actually what we really can do, just I guess to show you, this not null constraint on the last updated by and created by, we can leave on. And what we'll do instead is we're going to change this to 1000, or we're going to change this to a 1 and a 1. And there we go. We got one row inserted. So we didn't need to take the not null constraints off these because we're actually going to leave those. And really what we should have done, so I'm actually, because I believe what it has you do in the instructions. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place right now. We're going to delete from system user so I can start over here. All right. So in the instructions, our system admin user, we are going to make kind of special, mostly because we're going to be using it a lot. So when I insert into system user, instead of using the sequence, I'm going to hard code a value of 1 in there. And what we're doing here, even though our constraints are disabled, we are going to make it look like he created himself. So let's go ahead and reinsert that. And then we can select everything from system user and see our resulting record. So here we see that system user ID is 1, system user name is sysadmin, and it was created by 1 and last updated by 1. And this 1, eventually we know it's going to connect back up to our system user ID, which is exactly what we want. So now what we want to do is we want to re-enable those constraints. Well, let's follow the instructions because I think we... Okay, so we removed those constraints, got it to where we could insert it. So, and it says after running your lab2, because obviously the table has to be there, you will insert one row into the system user lab table. And you can see that's basically what we just did. Now, they left the first, middle name, and last name as empty strings. Now, there's a difference here. So, because let me delete again and we'll start over. You'll notice that they didn't put a name in there on the first name, last name. And what we can do is if you put in a null, can someone tell me if this would work? Any guesses? Having a null for the first name and last name.
Aren't those set up for not nulls?
Yep, exactly. So now, and that's probably where a lot of people get confused, because you'll notice here that these are blank. But the key is that they don't say null, because there is a difference, believe it or not. That is not null. But null is null.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's try to run this, make sure I got those in the right spot. There we go. And there we go. And what's interesting is even though we entered empty strings, it actually does show null there, even though it's actually not. It's a little weird. It's just how it outputs. It knows that an empty string should show as null. So there's our row inserted. So then what we do is we disable a couple more foreign key constraints, because we're going to insert into common lookup. So you'll disable those constraints, and I'm just for the sake of not doing the whole lab for you, I'm not going to do that. And then we insert 20 rows into the common lookup table. So just like before, we're going to insert some rows. And in inserting data, we've talked a little bit about, but we're going to do a couple more here in just a minute. But real quick, I wanted to talk a little bit about this. So when you do your inserts into common lookup, this is the data that you'll put in the various columns. So let's take a gander at common lookup. And actually, you know what, real quick, let's do this. It looks like I ran something in here, so let's get rid of it. There we go. All right, I'm real quickly going to run let's do that. I always do that. It's always studding it.
I did that same thing earlier this week.
Yeah, it happens frequently to me. It's not much fun. Let me make sure real quick. Sorry, I'm going to make sure that I have my files here. Apparently I haven't done any of this. Okay, so we'll do that another time. So if we take a look at common lookup, I'm trying to see if there's a better way. I really wish that this would format the way that we want it to. I guess let's do this. Can we run a describe in here? Okay, so if we're looking at common lookup, we have common lookup ID, context type, meaning, created by, creation date, last update by, last update date. But we have set a couple of constraints. We've disabled a few. And those constraints we disabled are the created by and the last updated by, just so you know. So anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to do a lot of inserts into here. And in Oracle, you can only do one insert at a time. So I'm going to show you how to do an insert two different ways. We're going to do the first two inserts here. So our first one has an ID of 1. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to say insert into common lookup. And this normally would say lab for you. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to specify the columns. Because like I said, there's kind of two ways to do it. They both work the exact same. One just saves you a little bit of typing. But this way, you can specify the order and what columns you want to insert into. So what I'm going to do is, in a painstakingly manner, I'm going to type all the columns here. Now, but one thing I'm going to do just to show, well, let's do it later. Common lookup type. So I'm just going to go down the list here. Created by last update by. I really dislike that that's last updated by and last up. I really want that just to be last update by. All right, and then we say values. And now we actually specify what we want to put in here. So just so you know, I am looking at this chart here. So for the ID, I'm going to hard code a 1. And then the context is going to be system user lab. And then the common lookup type is going to be system admin. Our meaning is going to be system administrator. And then our created by is going to be 1, sysdate 1, and sysdate. And then we can run this and we get 1 row inserted. Now you'll notice that this let me insert even though I didn't disable these constraints, and that's because I inserted this guy first. But just to show the point, if I were to delete this, it says, oh, you can't because now there is somebody in common lookup that depends upon you, is a good way to put it. So we can't delete it now because we tied this together, which is a big part of why you are going to disable those. So for you, that would work. For me, it's not going to right now because I haven't deleted it. But just so you know, that's how that tie works, because this is a foreign key to system user. In fact, it points exactly to sysadmin. And then that way we know sysadmin created the sysadmin group type for in common lookup. So another couple of key points is inside common lookup, you'll notice that we are putting these like system user lab in all uppercase. Now that's just a string. There is no tie there to actually system user lab, but what it allows us to do is we're differentiating what table this value goes to, because the real meat of this record is right here, system admin and system administrator. And so basically what we're doing is we're saying we're making a system admin role, and then we kind of give it a clean way to look at it. So imagine if you're in a dropdown. Those of you who've done web development know that a lot of times you either use the ID or some sort of code on the back end that people never see. But the nice pretty end, so people can see, oh, I'm a system administrator, you type it out all nice. Because as we all know in programming, spaces and case sensitive things are a pain in the butt. So what we do is we create system underscore admin, all uppercase, to make it slug and code friendly. Because this could also end up being like a slug for a URL. And as we all know, URLs don't work with spaces, so but underscores do. So that's why that's there. It's basically the code, which in a future lab, we actually changed the name of these columns to make a lot more sense. All right, and now to show you the easier way, because that was kind of a pain.
Hey, real fast, Brother Cook.
Yep.
How do you know you got a row inserted there? Did it actually do something that I can't see it?
Yeah, so right down here, it'll say 1 row inserted.
Well, yeah, I see that, but I mean, where does it actually appear? Anywhere?
So it's in the database, and if you want to look, you can just select from that table and pull it up.
Okay.
So it'll tell you that there was a row inserted.
Oh, I see the row now. Okay, I see it.
Yep. So if you ever want to double check yourself, you have to query from that table, and if you just do select asterisk from the table, it'll pull all the records, all the columns from that table. Basically, select everything from the table, and especially where we don't have very many rows, this works fine. So if you ever want to check, you can do that. But if you get the 1 row created, most of the time you're good.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
let's do another insert. So you'll notice that when we did this, we're inserting into every column in the order. But let's say this. Let's say I wanted to. Let's say I wasn't inserting into common lookup type or something. If you're excluding a column, you have to list out the column names, because otherwise it has to go in order. So but where we're inserting into every column in the table in order, I can actually cut out all of the column names to save some typing, and we can just run this. Now we want to change this to DBA, and that stands for Database Administrator. And so then we can run this up, and I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? One sysdate. Oh, we also got to change the primary key. That usually helps too. So let's run this. And then we get our 1 row inserted. And then if we want to look, we can select everything from common lookup and pull it up and see that we have our data there. And that's possible because we could take out the column list because we're inserting directly in order. Now, if I were to take and copy this and put it down here, but let's say that I just want to, let's say I do a typo and I do this, right? And I'm going to change that to 3 for now. You'll notice that I still get 1 row inserted, but this isn't going to work later on down the line. Like it works now, but it's not going to work later on down the line because these are actually backwards. However, if I did it with this, we could actually swap these two as well. So like if I'm going to take, let's swap this. And then let's swap our meaning and type. Change this to a 4. And I messed up on the type here. So let's change this to 2. We'll just put a 2 at the end. There we go. So now if I do a select, you'll notice that everything comes in right because I switched those 2 up here. So if you are inserting out of order, if you're excluding columns, you can leave out, or you have to have this. If you're doing anything that's not in the exact order, everything, you have to have it, because alternatively, if I try to cut out this all and then try to, let's say, leave off this one, even if it was or let's do 1 in the middle. So let's say that this was a null allowed column, even though it's not. Right now it's going to say not enough values. And that's because it's expecting me to fill every column in the table because I don't have a list of columns that I'm inserting into. Okay, so now obviously this is a mess from common ID 3 and up. So I'm going to say delete from system user where common lookup ID is greater than or equal to 3. And let's see, what did I do here? Oh, that's from system user. Let's try again. Common lookup where common lookup ID is greater than or equal to 3. There we go. And then if we look at this again, now we're back to where we started, which is good. So anyways, you'll do the inserts there, which is nice and easy. So if we look at the instructions, we have the primary key goes from 1 to 5. So you do 1 through 5 manually like this. But once we get to 5, we're going to do something a little different, because then from there, you'll notice that it starts counting from 1001. And that's indicative of us using our sequence, which is kind of what we want to do. So let's do the first one with a sequence. So our first one with the sequence is going to be contact lab for employee. So I'm going to leave that blank right now because we're going to do contact lab like it says in the instructions. We're going to do employee, and then our user-friendly explanation of employee. Now, like I said, we want, a lot of people could just do this, but we want to be a little bit more efficient than that. We want to practice a little bit with our sequence. So we are going to put common lookup S1 dot next val. So if I run this, we get our one row inserted, and I'm going to select everything from common lookup, and you'll notice that now that's 1001. So let's do one more and see what happens. So I'm just going to copy paste this. The nice thing, this lab compared to last lab will be a breeze for you guys, because a lot of this is pretty laid back. So the next one is we had employee. Now we're going to do customer. Right? And you'll notice that I can just leave this now. I don't even have to change that. It's one less thing you have to change. And then I get my one row inserted, and then let's select everything from common lookup again. And you'll notice that it's now 1002. So the nice thing is once you get 1 through 5 in, then it's just a matter of you can just kind of copy paste this, and most of the time these will stay the same. The context will stay the same for a few, sometimes many. And so really you only have to ever worry about changing 2 or 3 rows. Yeah, so the default interval starts at 1001 because that's what we set it to. So if we go back and look at our lab 2, or in this case, I'm going to pull up the create lab. So if you ever want a good example with the base tables, you can always go to the lib, create, and I'm going to look at our common lookup.sql file. So if we come in here and we look at our sequence, which is right here, create sequence common lookup S1, start with 1001. So that's why that starts with 1001. If we put something else there, obviously it would start with that, and so on and so forth. And in the next lab, we actually get to where we use these a lot, and we'll talk about that next lab. Let's keep going. So anyways, you'll get all those inserted. Nice and easy, gives you a lot of good experience with the insert in a nice and easy way. So step 7, it says write 2 queries against the common lookup lab table. And what a query is it's a select statement. And I'm going to explain kind of the verbiage here so that it makes sense. So this is kind of a tag spot, where if you want to understand how a select statement works in regards to how McLaughlin writes these instructions, this is a good one. So a query. So whenever we see query, it's basically a select statement, and it should return the common lookup lab ID column. So this is how I like to write these. So, and I'm going to read that off of there. And this is what's nice about SQL is it kind of flows the way that the mind thinks. So we're going to write a query. So that means select. And it should return, meaning it should give us the common lookup lab ID. And I'm going to put common lookup ID since I'm just using that one. And then it says from the common lookup lab table, right? So that's nice and easy because it says this is what you should return. From where? So obviously from common lookup. Where? So this is another keyword, that big old where. So we're going to say where, and it says the common lookup context column. So nice and easy. Lookup context column value equals an uppercase string literal of system group. So, and what he means by an uppercase string literal, a string literal is literally a hard-coded value. So we're actually going to type it in. So we're going to put system group. Okay, now real quick before I do this, so it actually gives us the proper values. I'm going to real quick delete everything from common lookup, and then we're going to delete everything from system user, and I'm actually going to let it precede and give us the correct values. All right. Now I had this open at lib create Oracle. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Create Oracle Store 2.SQL. Well, let's just do this. Student
Isn't it libl?
Oh, it is lib1. That changed with the. There we go. Thank you. Lib1 is the correct term there. So we got lib1. Now let's run our query here that we just wrote. Because now it should give us the actual result. Because this is as if we've already done it. Oh, and so it looks like I've done something wrong. Oh, and I guess it would also help to run the seed, the pre-seed. So we're going to pre-seed. Basically what I'm doing is I'm going to mimic what is done in lab 3. Oh, and I guess it would help if I there we go. So I had to roll back because I had a table locked in this session, so that's why it wasn't running. All right, so there we go. Now we have data. So let's go here and test our query. And it said that it should return a 3, and right now that's not what we're getting. So let's see what we have in common lookup. And there we go. And I guess it would help if I'd follow the instructions because it said common lookup type, and I am looking for common lookup column, so or context. So common lookup type is equal to system group, and it should return a value of 3. So we'll do one more though. So that's what we should get, and that's what we see. So that means we're good. And then one query. So again, query select should return the common lookup ID from common lookup where from common lookup lab where the common lookup context column value equals an uppercase string literal of system. Oh, and that's where I was getting messed up. So this was supposed to be common lookup context up here, and that was supposed to be system user, not system user group, and common lookup type is equal to system group. There we go. And so what this is doing real quick is those where clause, basically we're looking at this table, but what we're going to do is we're only going to show the value of this one column. So if, I guess as another example, if I was going to do this, select common lookup ID from common lookup, without a where clause, it will give us all of the common lookup IDs. When we add the where clause, though, is we filter out rows. And so we're going to filter out rows where the common lookup context is equal to system user. So that's nice and easy. Basically, we limit it down to these rows. And then we filter it further to say where this common lookup type is equal to system group. And that leaves us with one row. So that's essentially what the query is doing, is we're saying what we want to show on the screen, and then we're filtering out some of the results. So let's continue on with this last example. So common lookup context column value equals an uppercase string literal of system user lab. So same thing almost. And the common lookup type is equal to an uppercase string literal of system admin. Let's run this and see what we get, and we get a 1, and that's what we should get there. So that means we're good. So now what we're going to do is we are going to do an update statement, okay? And so really, I guess you understand kind of why we did those two steps. Is these are queries that give us one result. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to turn these, we're going to use those queries that we just wrote as subqueries. Because they return one result, we can kind of use them in another query to do something. So in this case, we're going to use the two queries from the previous step in an update statement. An update statement is how we change data in a table or add data to existing rows. Basically, we are manipulating existing rows in a table. So it says one query should assign the return value of a subquery to the system user type column. The subquery return common lookup ID column value from the common lookup table. Basically, this is saying our first query should assign the return value to the system user type column of the system user table. So what we would do is we would say update system user, and in your case, system user lab. And basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're going to be manipulating records in system user. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set a value equal to something. So in this case, we are going to set system user type column. So set system user type. And what are we going to set it equal to? Well, we're going to set it equal to the result set of the return value of the subquery. And this is our system user group subquery. So we're going to take this first one. We're going to copy everything besides the semicolon. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to put it in parentheses. So what I like to do is I like to put an opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis with a gap in the middle. Then I tab over and paste in there. And then because for some reason pasting is really hard with that, I make it look pretty. So essentially what this is going to do is it's going to execute this statement, and it's going to say, okay, we're going to update system user, and we're going to set the system user type equal to this value. So let's give this a run. Now, let's make sure that this doesn't have anything else in here. So one query should, the subquery should return common lookup via the, yep, okay. So if we run this just like this, we're not going to put a where clause on there. You'll notice it says 3 rows updated. So now if I select everything from common lookup, or from system user, sorry. You'll notice that the system user type is all equal to 3. And what did our subquery return? 3. And that's because essentially this is the equivalent, because we know this returns a 3, it's the equivalent of just saying that. Does that make sense to everybody? It's in here. How that subquery works. Perfect.
Does me.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, and then you're going to do the same thing pretty much again with the other one.
What would be the change in syntax if you had to do 2 subqueries in one query? You wouldn't have the semicolon because that would end the entire query, correct?
Correct.
Would you have a comma or?
Well, and so the thing is here is this, where we set system user type equal to,
Mm-hmm.
basically this is expecting a single value.
Mm-hmm.
So we can only have one result set here, one subquery, if that makes sense.
But what if, couldn't you on the next line do like set system user, or I don't know what another?
Yeah, so like if
would
you
be
were
in
going to
there.
set multiple columns.
Yeah.
So like let's say we also wanted to change. So in fact we can like if we wanted to change the system user name or what was it, system user group? Yeah, system user group I think is the next step. Let's look. So system user. Nope, it's just we just reset it. System user group ID. Actually, no, I think that is supposed to be group. So like, let's say we were going to change the group ID as well.
Mm-hmm.
And is it system user group ID or system user group? And you'll notice because I missed that semicolon, it tried to run too. System user group ID. So let's put an ID there. And so we would just put a comma. We'd say system user group ID. And then we could put our parentheses. Because they're technically part of a separate, not a separate statement, but a separate part of the clause, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So that's what we would do with an update statement. And that's essentially the equivalent of doing this. And you can basically cut and replace because this is going to return a 1 and this is going to return a 3. So that is the equivalent if you were going to hard code those values. The nice thing is using a subquery is even if things are changing in our database constantly, this way you know you always pull the correct values, if that makes sense. Because let's say that someone accidentally deletes the system admin type or group or whatever, and then recreates it, that value is going to change. So now we can't depend that this is always going to be 1. But if we have it written like this, then it will always be correct, even if people are changing things. Good questions. All right, so once we get all those things inserted and those things updated, we re-enable our constraints, which I think you know how to do because it's just the opposite of this. So you'd say alter table, enable constraint. So you enable that constraint, you enable those other constraints, and then we do a couple of inserts on the last step. So we do some inserts into system user lab that uses a sequence and subqueries. So I'm going to let step 11 kind of be the so-called challenge. Since I already explained how this goes, it should be pretty easy. And when I say easy, I mean, you know, read the instructions and you should be able to get it. If not, just shoot me a message on Slack. We should be able to get it figured out. So I'm going to leave 11 up to you. Just know that here is your 2 rows that you're going to insert. So basically the way this table works is you have your column and then the value that goes in that column for this will be row 1 and this will be row 2. And I know it says value number 1. I should say value number 2. But it's just a typo. So anyways, you have your column and then your stuff there. All right, and that one wants you to use the sequence, which we covered, so you should be able to use the sequence without too much issue. But what's nice is this will have you do the subquery for all of the different things, like one will be the DBA, which is right here. So right here. And this is telling you essentially where it should come from. So the column system user, basically this is telling you where it should come from. This really is essentially, like if we look at our table here, system user group ID and system user type. And that shows you where those should come from. So system user group and system user type will come from the subqueries here and here. And then your created by and last updated by are these 2 subqueries here. Does that make sense? Basically, you're going to write your subqueries for
on that table there, so it shows column and then value number 1 and value number 1, but like DBA 1 is different than DBA 2. I haven't looked through this, so I'm sorry if it's very obvious, but value number 1 and value number 1, what are those referring to?
Yeah, and this should say value number 2. Basically, this is saying like row 1, row 2.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, and so then you'll basically put these in, and they're basically like trash records, but just practice records, I guess I should say. Because basically you'll put that in there, and then for your group ID, and then your, I guess it's not group, it's group and type. So type would be DBA, group would be, see, what was it? How did that work out? Anyways, you'll know because in your subquery, you'll actually put like group and stuff like that, because the common lookup type will be system group or whatever. So right there, system group, which makes it. So, all right. So those are you'll do those inserts, and then you'll run this at the end and make sure they all come up. you should get a, oh, and that's actually, this has got a typo in it too, because they actually have Phineas all the way through, and it should be Phineas Taylor Barnum. So, you know, and don't get too worked up about it. Really, if you have the 2 rows, and yeah, that'll be good enough. So if you want to put Barnum and Taylor as the middle name and all that kind of stuff, or they can just all be Phineas, up to you. We will take either or. Does that make sense to everybody? Like I said, this lab actually isn't near as complicated as what I think last lab is. For the most part, people tend to do much better with lab 3 than they do lab 2.
So it looks like we're creating a script again. Would you suggest using SQL Developer to like test our queries, or how would you use Developer, or would you just not worry about it with this lab?
So I actually wouldn't use Developer.
Okay.
And the reason being is I would probably just write your script here, and then I would just constantly run it, because once you, like, if in fact if I open up the lab 3, it should have calls to lab 2 and well as the pre-seed. But what this will do, because it calls your lab 2, every time you run this, it's going to delete everything and recreate it, which means that you're not going to be stuck trying to fix an issue that's actually because something got created and then you never deleted it, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You'll notice that I was constantly having to go back, delete things, and rerun, you know, stuff like that. So what I would do is I would just write them right in here. And the other nice thing is it's already got the validation steps in here. And so that way, every time you put it in there and run it, you'll get the response back right there. So
okay,
I would run it right in here and in your terminal, and then just go with it. Yeah.
okay. Can I ask one more question?
For sure.
For live database release, when you create a database, how do they handle the preceding? Is that, do they precede it before releasing it so that those inserts can be done? Or is this just something that's happened because we're working on an example database, if that makes sense?
No, yes, that's a good question. So in production databases, one of 2 things happens. Most of the time what happens is they ship you, like you'll set up the database. Like, for example, our student information system is a purchase product. So we spin up a database, and obviously it's just sitting there, doesn't have any tables or anything. And then just like what we're doing, they have a script that basically builds all the tables and seeds the data in there for you. And a lot of times, actually, so MySQL, there's a tool called MySQL Dump, and all the others have this similar. But essentially what you do is the way you back up your database is you actually create a giant .SQL file that literally recreates everything. So, like if, in fact, I wonder if I have, let me see if I actually have my dump file. Wow, apparently I have way too many .SQL files. Because somewhere I thought I had a, like if you ever want to migrate a WordPress website, you actually have to do a SQL dump. And basically it's just it just recreates your database. I actually, I have one here somewhere. Let me hurry and find it for you. There we go. All right, so here is a backup of a database, and you'll notice that this is WordPress, and you'll notice that it just goes through, and you'll notice it says drop table if exists, and it literally is recreating a bunch of tables. And it can also insert into there, basically doing essentially what we are, if that makes any sense. Because
yeah, thank you.
Yep. So that's how a lot work. But it just depends, because like a lot of production stuff, but really even in a lot of like development stages, like even when I build a system, I kind of script it all out. And the reason being, if I ever need to spin up a backup or a sandbox stage, it's super easy. A lot of times what I actually do is I just run like the dump off the production, so then I have all my real data. But if I ever want a fresh like start, I have it there, and it's just good to have in case you ever lose something for whatever reason. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
that way you have all your database definitions and everything right there. So good
Thank
question.
you.
Yep. All right. Any other questions pertaining to the lab before I stop the recording?